Hi guys, Merry Christmas! I'm gonna try to make this a pretty quick preamble. What you're about to watch is, the results of me being a crazy person. Around the middle or the end of November, leading into December, we decided to watch one really bad Christmas thing a day. And it was partway through that process that I thought, you know, there's material for an interesting video in here. And it's not every year that I get the chance to, or even bother to do, a Christmas video. And so if I was gonna make one, I wanted it to be something that was kind of extensive and substantial and definitive, but also generally pretty relaxed. I'm gonna segment this out movie by movie. I'm recording this having already done all 25 days, by the way. Yeah, this is a video where you should feel free to jump around freely to whichever movies you see listed in the description that you find remotely interesting or that you want to hear my thoughts on, or you can just listen through it from beginning to end. That would certainly help my metrics. But really, this is one that I just wanted to do in the spirit of being a fun Christmas gift to you guys. And I certainly hope that those of you who bother with it find it entertaining. That said, assume that if I talk about a movie in this video that I will be being very liberal with spoilers. So if there's anything here that you were actually interested in seeing, then maybe do that first, and then come back to hear my thoughts on it. Merry Christmas, or whatever it is you celebrate. Happy holidays all around. So yeah, I'll see you back at the end for a recap sort of thing. But enjoy. Bye-bye. Today is November 24th, and last night I watched A Very Country Christmas. Tell you what, I'm not sure why this movie has that title. Like, the main character, Zane Gunther, is a country singer, but aside from that detail and the fact that he and, one other character in this movie have southern accents, and the consistent use of, country-sounding background music, there's not really anything overly country about the plot of this movie or anything stylistically country about it. It's kind of an arbitrary feeling title choice, I think. It's also a little bit weird because it's not the title of the book this was based on, which is a title that I could look up, but I don't feel like it. Zane Gunther is... he has the hair of an anime villain. My first appraisal of his character was that he was boring and I didn't like him. And then he actually started getting characterized. I'm like, I think this guy's just me. He's just me, but as a country singer. And white, which, same thing, I suppose. Obviously, the objective answer for why I was so, dismissive of him earlier in the movie is because he hadn't been completely characterized yet. But the more interesting answer is that I have, deep-seated self-loathing issues or something. I don't know. Pick whichever one you find more satisfying. Jeanette, who is the female lead in this movie, gives off major Karen vibes to me personally. On at least 2 occasions, she goes off on these kind of entitled, insecure, Karen rants delivered in the style of, Ben Shapiro. I don't know, the main thing I have to say about this movie is really just how kind of weirdly, novel, but not necessarily in a compelling way it is compared to other rom-coms, especially other, bad B-C tier rom-coms. For one, I would say between Zane and Jeanette, Zane, the, unattainable male lead, is actually more so the protagonist of the movie. He's more the viewer's POV character, and I think that's sort of interesting. Weird thing that this movie does is that it sets up, several supporting characters and, classic, contrived rom-com conflicts, and then just doesn't do any of them. It just doesn't follow through with any of them, and I guess there's just something kind of fascinating and novel about that. Because the movie doesn't choose to replace these tropes with anything. You think you know where the movie is going to go to ratchet up some kind of tension or, drama, but all of it just kind of resolves quietly, and it's like the movie is actively avoiding anything that could even slightly heighten the narrative stakes. Like, one of these characters is like the sheriff of the small town that they're at, who's like a huge Zane Gunther fangirl, and she's just completely inappropriate, total stalker, and she's like at a 10. She's up here in every scene in this movie, and it's not necessary. Like, I'm constantly worried about her leaving a wet spot wherever she happens to sit down. And, like, you think they're gonna go somewhere with her for, like, some classic romantical misunderstandings, or, like, other people getting the wrong idea and trying to pull our protagonists apart, and then that just doesn't happen. I don't know, like, at least 4 or 5 different plot points are introduced and then quietly shuffled aside in this movie like that. You know, there are certainly worse notes that we could have started this little experiment out on, so hey, I guess there's that. Today's November 25th, and last night I watched Christmas with a Prince. Not The Christmas Prince, but Christmas with a Prince. So this is done by the same studio that did A Very Country Christmas, and in fact it uses a couple of the same locations and a couple of the same extras as that movie. And the skeleton of the plot is basically the same from the outset. A famous guy has to go off the grid for a while, so he ends up staying with this no-nonsense working-class girl, except instead of a country singer, it's a prince, and instead of a small town, it's a hospital ward. Oh, and the working-class girl is a doctor who used to go to school with him, so maybe the comparison is a little tenuous, just saying it out loud, but trust me. And, like, this guy is ridiculously attractive, like to the point that it borders on uncanny. He's got the square lantern jaw and the 8-pack that looks like it was carved from stone. And I don't have body image issues, don't be ridiculous. You know, I hope the majority of these movies aren't like this one, because this one is remarkably boring and unremarkable. I'm watching these with Brianna and Eden, and even putting aside our usual chattiness when we're just watching movies casually, it was almost difficult to not talk over this one because so much of it is almost like empty space. This movie has some of that contrived, misunderstanding, romantic conflict that the last one avoided, and it all comes and goes pretty quickly. It's all part of this movie's really, really bizarre structure. Like, the first third is basically all set up and really, really lukewarm, tame shenanigans. Then the next 20-ish minutes is a lot of wringing drama out of sick kids, and all the weirdly confrontational side characters. Like, the chief of medicine in this movie is insanely unprofessional. She regularly dismisses and berates the staff. She wears the coat over dresses with ludicrous amounts of décolletage that no doctor would ever wear on the job, and she's just like a really, really obnoxious person. Until the end of the second act just has her arbitrarily realize the error of her ways off screen, so all the conflict with her gets to resolve without any real narrative arc. But anyway, all the hospital-related conflict and stuff all just resolves, and the main characters get together, and just when you think you're getting to the end of this really, really boring movie, like this really flat hospital romance, you realize there's somehow a whole third of the film left, and all of a sudden you're hit with a surprise rival fiancé character who was not seated or even mentioned in the first hour of the film, and then it's time to get to a royal party where the movie becomes like budget F-tier Crazy Rich Asians. It becomes a whole different movie in the last 25 minutes. Like, I was trying to come up with what the right analogy for what this movie felt like, and Brianna put it best, which is, it feels like a live-action adaptation of a webtoon that after an hour decided it actually wanted to be a movie, but had no time or budget left to do that properly. It's like this happens to me so rarely, just to watch a movie and be kind of disengaged with it, and then, like, in the 11th hour, it becomes a completely different animal, and I don't even know how to process it. I'll say this much for this movie: when it's in the middle chunk and we spend, like, whole scenes on sick or injured kids, all that stuff feels remarkably natural, like, by the standards of one of these movies anyway. Whenever the characters have to talk about or deal with the sick kids, it's like suddenly they're actually giving performances that go beyond the bare minimum of what a Netflix Christmas romance movie requires. I don't know. I would recommend this one less than A Very Country Christmas, unless you want to personally experience the whiplash that is thinking the movie is about to end and then suddenly a completely different movie starts with barely 20 minutes left. It's Thanksgiving, and last night I watched Get Santa. Jodie Whittaker is in this movie. Like, she gets nothing to do, but there she is. That was a pleasant surprise. Sorry if you hear any background noise, by the way. That's the fridge. So this one did not make a good impression on Brianna, which, makes sense. She has an even smaller tolerance for secondhand embarrassment than I do, and this movie has a lot of it. This is a movie where we get an extended sequence of Santa walking down a prison hallway with his hair and beard put up into dreadlocks while Straight Outta Compton plays in the background. I'm not kidding. Straight Outta Compton plays over this scene. But oddly enough, the movie kinda sorta won me over at least. Like, it was ultimately a charming, enjoyable watch, even kinda moving in places. Jim Broadbent's Santa is kinda goofy and remarkably incompetent. The entire plot hinges on him getting arrested and put in prison because he failed to catapult the reindeer out of captivity. So this little kid and his dad, who's out on parole, have to go collect the reindeer and the sleigh for him. He also has, way less social acuity than I'm used to seeing Santa characterized with, at least in something that isn't an outright farce. Like, this could be Billy and Mandy's Santa for just how not attuned with reality he is. That said, there are these token scenes where he gets to play it more straight, and in those moments the performance really does shine in that earnest, hokey way you can only get with a Christmas movie. It's just, I don't know, weird, I guess, because I'm not used to seeing Santa be portrayed in things as outright unintelligent the way he seems to be for half this movie. This feels like the kind of Christmas movie that I'd really love and revisit every year if I'd been at the right age when I first saw it. Unlike the previous two, it's a theatrical release with a novel enough premise, it moves at a solid enough clip, and it just has just enough good gags to carry me through most of it, and it's got a decent-sized budget for what it is. A lot of Christmas movies that I got into as a kid and still go back to every year are movies in this vein, the kind of thing I'm talking about. It's just a silly little Christmas family comedy with a big, sweet, beating heart on its sleeve. Like, man, the final shot of this movie, that's just some heartwarming stuff. I feel like what holds this one back, if anything, is just that the central father-son relationship at the heart of it ain't all that strong. And I feel like a lot of that is on the kid. As child actors go, the kid playing him is fine, but on the page I don't think there's much to that character. What exactly the nature of their relationship is on his end feels kinda tenuous. And it's a shame because the dad, Steve, is actually a compelling enough protagonist with a solid storyline. I just feel like one half of our protagonist duo I can't quite get a read on. But that's my fuddy-duddy analytical brain talking. I really feel like this is exactly the kind of movie that's going to be looked back on as a kind of weird, quirky little Christmas classic by people who are in its target audience. Oh, and can't forget, the climax of this movie features Santa firing on the police with a Tommy gun that shoots reindeer poop. That's a thing that happens in this film, and yes, it is very satisfying. It's November 27th, and last night I watched Noelle. So for this special occasion, we swap from Netflix to Disney Plus, and the last one was Brianna's least favorite movie so far. This one was probably my least favorite. I unironically liked a lot of Get Santa, and the two Brainpower Studios movies were bad in ways that were stimulating to think about. This one didn't really have any jokes that make me laugh. Its characters were all extremely thin, and all the ideas and arcs were pretty half-formed. Part of that is how I think the Christmas lore of this movie was really poorly explained. This isn't something that I think gets touched on a lot, since you don't often see people talk about Christmas movies analytically, but you ever notice how the in-universe rules and conventions and lore of how Santa works is usually pivotal to framing the character arcs in these kind of Santa is real movies? Well, I don't think it's a coincidence that all of those things are really loosely defined in Noelle, and the main character's journey is also just equally as poorly conveyed. I don't know, just the world building for this movie's interpretation of the North Pole is super off, and that applies to how the elves are all characterized too, because it seems like Noelle is the only person in the North Pole actually practicing any Christmas spirit, but the movie never really makes a point of that. Noelle accidentally gets her brother lost, and the entire North Pole turns on her. Like, they completely cast her out. They start excluding her from restaurants and overcharging her when she buys clothes. Not the kind of behavior you'd expect from people who are inundated with the spirit of goodwill toward man all year round. I couldn't tell you what Noelle learned in this movie, what the arc of her character is, or whatever. I can tell you after a whole movie of building her up to be the superior Santa to her brother Nick because she gets the Christmas spirit and has the magical Santa genes in a way that he doesn't, the movie ends pretty abruptly with her pretty much completely fumbling her first night out. It's just kind of hilarious how after a whole movie very unsubtly positioning her as the rightful Santa, with both her brother and her cousin being totally unsuited for it, and this whole pseudo-feminist angle of there's never been a girl Santa before, Noelle goes out and she basically does nothing right. She accidentally misses entire countries on her first go-round. She breaks fragile presents by throwing them. She drops some presents over the ocean and, as far as we know, never goes back for them. And she gets spotted by pretty much everyone she tries to deliver to. This is so weird because this is again a movie where no one believes Santa exists, but no one has any remotely adverse reaction to seeing this girl come down their chimneys. And this is all the end of the film, like the last 10 minutes. So this isn't like building to an arc where she learns to get good at this stuff. It all just happens at the end, and we're left to assume that it all turned out okay, even though this has to have been the most disastrous Christmas on record. Most of the movie is spent with Noelle searching for her brother Nick, because he decides to abandon the job of being Santa because it's too much pressure, and he just extends what was supposed to be a weekend vacation into several months, which honestly is a mood. Billy Eichner is playing Gabe, the weird tech-obsessed cousin who has these insanely arbitrary standards for which kids are naughty and nice, which doesn't help with the thin world building because I feel like the North Pole's regular standards are just as arbitrary. And I feel like he's weirdly bad performance-wise. Granted, he doesn't have a lot of screen time. Frankly, it feels like he only exists to artificially ratchet up the conflict in really unnecessary ways, but he also seems eternally constipated. Once again, one of these Christmas movies has a ridiculously, concerningly horny side character. This time it's a lady who Noelle manages to get favors from by helping her endear herself to the pet coworker that she's insanely thirsty for. This is also the second one of these with a divorce element, although I suppose if there's anything that I appreciate about this movie, it's that they don't go into like a trite like love story between Noelle and a certain character where they very easily could have, so I guess that's neat. So many scenes in this movie feel like they end early or like they were cut off with lots of scenes still left, and like it would suck if something like that were to happen to this review. It's November 28th, and last night I watched A Bad Mom's Christmas. And honestly, this one is the best, if only for the credit sequence. But seriously, this movie gets massive respect from me for being a completely self-contained, satisfying experience, despite being a sequel, which is something I didn't know until after I'd finished it. This is another theatrical release we found on Netflix. It's also the first R-rated joint we've looked at. Like the last one, it's also a feminist piece, though this one is way more cogent and actually has something to say with that angle, unlike Noelle, which just drops in some token, aimless allusions toward patriarchy. Like, there's really something to be said for how American consumerist culture puts this insane amount of pressure on family matriarchs, and how that's at its worst during the holidays. Unfortunately, I feel like that theme kind of falls out of the movie as we get more into the characters' specific relationships, but honestly, that's fine. This is a good, character-driven comedy. The premise is just that a bunch of house moms have to deal with their own emotionally abusive moms at Christmas. So, Kristen Bell is this ditzy, high-strung one who has to put up with her mom, played by Cheryl Hines, being weirdly obsessed with and attached to her. Mila Kunis has her mom, who's this rich wasp, played by Christine Baranowski, who wants to manufacture her perfect Christmas and is, a supervillain. And finally, we got Catherine Hahn, whose mom is deadbeat, druggy Susan Sarandon. Of all these, I enjoyed the Hahn and Sarandon stuff the most. They're the most likable and dynamic characters, and are also low-key giving the best performances. Kristen Bell and her mom are probably the least of the three plots, from my perspective. Their whole conflict is kind of repetitive and flat, but it does still make for the occasionally really fun gag, and Kristen Bell gets a lot of good lines outside of that. And Mila Kunis, her plot is where I have my main objections with the movie. The big emotional low point of the film, like the in media res that we open the movie with, that whole emotional beat, it doesn't feel earned at all. And a lot of that is my personal family experience of just like, there's a particular way that Mila Kunis' kids react to her kicking her own mom out of her life, rightly so, given she's an abusive supervillain. And the kids' reactions and the narrative of the movie tries to make it seem like Mila Kunis was being even slightly unreasonable, or like she's remotely obligated to forgive her supervillain mom when she just isn't. And I get it, Christmas is the season of forgiveness, but the movie frames it like the controlling, manipulative, shallow, emotionally hurtful, casually racist lady who's objectively the worst person in the movie should just get off with a slap on the wrist because of all these convenient emotional excuses and the alleged character traits she has, which we haven't really seen. In this movie that I otherwise wholeheartedly, unironically enjoyed, it was this unfortunate bit that left a terrible taste in my mouth. Hollywood movies have a real issue with excusing abusive behavior from parents, and this was a case that hit a little too close to home. You know, a couple of the jokes in this movie are kind of bombs. The whole caroling sequence didn't really do it for me, but for the most part, this was a really funny movie and I'm glad I watched it. And this movie, again, also involved a lot of over-the-top, thirsting ladies. Only this time it was the ladies in the movie, but also the ladies watching the movie with me. I'm gonna go do some push-ups. It's November 29th, and last night I watched The Ultimate Christmas Present. This is another Disney Plus one, and you know you're in for some great schlock when it opens with 'Tis the Season, but reggae. This is easily the schlockiest one we've looked at so far, being, you know, a Disney Channel movie for babies. My big takeaway from this movie is that I'm gonna try and actively avoid any of this kind of brand of Disney Channel movie. Like, I know there are Disney Channel movies out there that are actually interesting and have stuff going on, but this is such a little kids movie that I kind of zoned out and have comparatively little to say about it. Like, my mind aggressively refused to engage with it except for clowning on it, particularly on the performances, all of which are quite bad. The plot involves these two middle school girls finding Santa's weather machine and using it to make a massive blizzard in Los Angeles so they can have a snow day. Part of why it's hard to care too much is because these two characters are really catty and always arguing, in a way I've been told is true of girls their age, but which makes it so I'm not invested in their friendship. It doesn't help that the one or two scenes where they're written to be like actual friends come off really stilted. Another issue with getting me to care is that the movie just drops things that are initially set up as important. Like this party they plan to go to, thrown by this boy they both like. It's set up and then referenced once or twice, and then just completely forgotten about once the movie gets going. The closest thing the movie has to a villain is crazy meteorologist man, who, I don't know what his deal is, but he seems absolutely incapable of operating on camera. Or around people, period. But it's okay, because at the end of the movie, he gets his happy ending, which is teaching meteorology in Antarctica to a bunch of other maladjusted, bow-tie-wearing, bespectacled nerds like himself. Not even kidding, that is the last scene before the credits. You've got to wonder how he got a job as a weatherman in the first place, or any job. This guy makes Series 1 Sherlock look socially well-adjusted. Like, this wouldn't be a bad performance if he were a serial killer in a procedural cop series or something. Santa in this movie has all the delivery and demeanor of, like, a Bond villain. Combine that with the fact that the two main elves who are helping him out in the movie are ludicrously tall grown men, and the fact that they spend a bulk of the movie harassing young girls, and they all together give off major Predator vibes. Hey, don't eat that. Sorry, my dog was in the corner of the room eating tissues. Yeah, so this movie is the kind of thing I personally want to avoid. I don't think I'll get a lot of mileage out of stuff that's bad in this everybody involved was just phoning it in way. It's November 30th, and last night I watched A Princess for Christmas. Man, just a lot of Christmas royalty movies. My dog and my cat are both here for this one. You guys just sit tight. Feel free to chip in when you have an opinion. I've experienced quite a lot of cringe watching these movies, but I think the peak so far has to be the scene in this movie where a bunch of pasty white people perform an impromptu dance to a rap song, which the characters in the movie refer to as gangster and ghetto. The editing in this movie is so odd and disorienting at points. Like, simple dialogue scenes between three characters will have like a cut every 2 seconds. Scenes will go from a steady cam to like weirdly intense shaky cam shots for no reason. Katie McGrath seems like she's trying to do her American accent here, but this is 5 years before Supergirl and it fluctuates real bad, constantly. Honestly, it feels like the only reason they even bother with it is because she wouldn't be as relatable to the American middle-class audience if she spoke with her natural accent. The teenage boy in this movie also looks and sounds really weird. Like, is that mean to say? Like, he sounds like an even more pubescent Danny Phantom, and his face is way too mature looking for how short he is. I'm so glad I never met this kid, because I wouldn't be able to resist comparing him to the Fred videos, like, even down to the haircut. This movie has the trope that I really hate, where a character overhears part of a conversation that's not about them, but assumes it's about them, and starts to react in really extreme ways based on this lack of information. Like, look, I get that not everyone can be confrontational and seek out confirmation for these things before forming a plan of action, like, you know, leaving your adopted kids behind because you don't want to have a hard conversation to confirm if you were the victim of classism. But still, that's like not a train of thought that I'm able to empathize with, and it always feels really forced and lame when movies do it, like they just genuinely could not come up with any more natural conflict. Katie McGrath is actually a really good actress though, terrible accent consistency aside, and I feel like she's giving it her all, even with this really contrived drama she's given. Roger Moore is also really good, and in the end I suppose I just found this movie harmless, innocent fluff, yeah, outside of that one big sticking point. It's on the exact same level as A Very Country Christmas. It's the kind of thing you'd find while channel surfing on the holidays, and you just leave it on because it feels Christmassy and there's nothing really bothersome about it. It's December 1st, and last night I watched The 12 Dates of Christmas. Of all the... Hang on. Of all the movies we've watched so far, this one gets the award for most bizarre protagonist. Kate, the female lead, is just this incomprehensibly odd, freaky personality, and I spend this entire movie wanting to know what her damage is. She has zero social skills and spends way too much of this movie either not adjusting her behavior for the fact that she's in a Groundhog Day style time loop and thus no one else has any clue what she's talking about, or just otherwise being, I don't know how to even describe it, she's just very odd. She has this super unhealthy obsession with snatching her longtime ex back from the jaws of his new marriage, and is also super immature about her dad remarrying in a way that is not befitting a 30-something-year-old woman. No matter how sheltered or white she is, she doesn't know what a spatula looks like. She doesn't know that honey has a smell. She's just weird in this all-encompassing, ludicrous way. Not a single scene goes by where she comes off like a normal human being. She also takes food with her into bed and then leaves it unfinished on the floor while she sleeps. Like, gross, this lady's a mess. One timeline ends with her barging in on her ex and his new fiancé in a misguided attempt to rescue their proposal, and then just her sitting down in their living room monologuing to herself while they gaze into each other's eyes like 3 feet behind her. But then both romantic leads start this movie being pretty childish and unlikable.
Like, the male lead, Miles, normally seems like a kind of down-to-earth, normal guy, but on more than one occasion, he'll just storm out because Kate got, like, a phone call or mentioned something, like, unprompted about her ex, and it's just such a douchey, insecure move that makes me immediately not want them to get together. And even when the movie ends and I've kind of come around on it in terms of its storytelling, I'm still not really invested in that particular romance. I swear to God, this movie is just chock to the brim with so much stuff. It's kind of unique among Groundhog Day movies in that every timeline genuinely almost feels like a different narrative. Such is the magnitude of subplots and side characters who only pop up in specific go-rounds. But the weirdest thing about this movie is that it's actually, like, really, really thematically solid. Like, aside from A Bad Mom's Christmas, it's probably got the most meaningful, well-thought-out character arc about letting people into your life and not being scared of new relationships. Not just romantically, but with anyone who might be in your sphere, and, actively choosing to let them in. The ending of this movie is so weirdly heartwarming given how dominated my viewing experience was by the sheer unprecedented kookiness of the main character. I've never had this kind of experience with a movie, like, geez. So yeah, aside from A Bad Mom's Christmas, this is probably my favorite one. It's December 2nd, and last night I watched I'll Be Home for Christmas. Okay, so this is like the last movie if everyone was just as weird as that main character. Heck, in this one, the main character is pretty much the straight man. In other words, it's a doofy screwball comedy for middle schoolers. Prize for weirdest character this time is the super anal retentive control freak bus driver who looks like he's having a straight up crisis in every scene. It's also the second one of these in a row with a protagonist who's got this weird complex about a new stepmom. I gotta say, this is the only one of these that wasn't a completely unknown quantity to me when I started it. By which I mean, I knew the basic plot and a lot of the major set pieces before watching it last night. And given what I knew about this movie and certain opinions others had on it, I was fully expecting to dislike it, but I think this might be another one I think is actually good. Like, it's not what I'd call a Christmas classic or anything, but it's another one that has a genuine heart to it, and an actual functioning character arc, even if all the main characters are obnoxious in a way that only 90s teen comedy protagonists can be. And hey, this one even has consistent laughs that work. The dialogue is goofy and over the top, and the performances aren't going above and beyond for the kind of thing this is, but for some of the exchanges and one-liners and general shenanigans, they're actually pretty funny. This is probably going to be among the shortest one of these just because a lot of what makes it work for me is specific comedic and character beats that I don't want to go into in case anyone wants to actually watch this movie. Granted, I don't know how much of the laughs were just me being amused by how frustrated Brianna got with the characters' combined stupidity. Either way, this particular viewing experience was a riot. This is another one I could absolutely see myself going back to with the family every December. Though it freaking weirds me out how Jonathan Taylor Thomas speaks exactly like Jamie Kennedy in the Scream movies.
It's December 3rd, and last night I watched Snowglobe. Yay, another one of these that's straight up bad. I was beginning to worry I was being too positive. This movie opens with maybe the worst rendition of Jingle Bells I've ever heard. The word I'd use for it is tacky, and that really ends up describing the whole movie. Angela is this 20-something girl who's always getting set up on dates with men and having her life invaded by her family, who owns the apartment complex she lives in and the deli that she works at. They're really obnoxious, and they don't care a lot about her feelings, and all Angela wants is a nice, traditional Christmas. Some mysterious plot convenience mailman shows up and gives her a snow globe, which magically transports her inside this idyllic Christmas wonderland. And from there, a lot of the movie is just her going back and forth from this perfect Christmas to her family holidays and kind of trying to juggle those two things. The Snow Globe village itself is very, very white, and I don't just mean the snow. In fact, this whole conflict is really racially coded in a way that feels like it had to be intentional. It's all about the appeal of this milquetoast, quote-unquote perfect Christmas populated entirely by gooberish white people who want for nothing, and Angela realizing how shallow and unfulfilling that is compared to this very flawed, lower-middle-class, eclectic Christmas held by her real Cuban-Italian family. It's unfortunate that this is kind of undermined by the fact that her family is the worst, though. Angela spends most of the movie with this Snowglobe resident Douglas, who's like our romantic false lead, and that Angela is remotely attracted to Douglas kinda baffles me. He has all the mental capacity of a small child, and like I have zero clue what about him she finds appealing. I mean, I guess he's tall, but like once we get to the stretch of the movie where he comes out into the real world, and after their night on the town, she's all like super horned up and ready for sex having, like with the lingerie and everything. I'm just like, you had to basically parent this grown man all night. What about being around him gets you in the mood? Douglas's, I don't know, I guess you would call it actual love interest, is this blonde lady Marie who, for one, looks a lot like Kirsten Dunst, but more importantly, no exaggeration, has exactly 2 lines of dialogue in the entire first half of this movie before she spends the next 40 plus minutes of screen time exclusively walking out of rooms and around corners to like stare forlornly at Douglas and Angela getting along and also occasionally shovel snow. This movie has maybe the most rushed third act of anything I've ever seen. It's like after Angela going back and forth from reality to the snow globe and then having the conflict be that characters like Douglas and Marie have come out of the snow globe, suddenly in the last 10 or so minutes of the movie, the conflict becomes Angela being stuck in the snow globe and wanting to get out because she's realized that even if her family Christmases are awful, at least they're hers, which is better than being bland and perfect. Which, sure, that's a decent moral, I guess, if you were to give it a completely different context, since it doesn't really land at all the way the movie frames it. Like, I wish I had any reason to find the dynamic between Angela and her family remotely endearing, but I kind of just spend the whole movie hoping she tells them all to get bent. So yeah, unfortunately a really bad one. Nothing in here that I can recommend as like a reason you should sit down with it. It doesn't even have good Christmas food. Like, there's food in pretty much every scene of this movie, and all of it is the worst looking food I've ever seen in a movie. It's December 4th, and last night I watched The Mistle-Tones. This movie is astonishing. Like, ooh, was this one painful. For Brianna in particular, I worry that I've caused massive psychological damage by making her sit through this one. This plummeted to the bottom of her list like I don't know, a sphere of concentrated dark matter. I personally have never experienced a movie like this, by which I mean a jukebox musical where all but 2 of the songs are public domain. We get a performance of All I Want for Christmas Is You toward the end, which you imagine costs them an arm and a leg and is probably the best performance in the movie, and the other is the worst performance in the movie, and it's Burning Love of all things, which is conspicuously the only non-Christmas song in the film. I'm not sure if the cost of licensing those 2 songs kneecapped the budget so they were forced to just use public domain Christmas carols for the rest of it, but the result is the worst kind of musical where not a single number does anything to progress the characters or the story. Tia Mowry is in this one as Holly, this office worker who gets rejected when she tries to join this local singing group called the Snowbells, which was founded by her mom. So yes, this is another mommy issues movie. It's really weird how many of these movies hinge on parental issues, mommy issues specifically, but it's okay because the electric sign outside of the local mall spurs Holly into suggesting a singing competition, ostensibly to dethrone the Snowbells. As for why a light-up mall sign is inspiring our main character, I don't know, is she actively hallucinating? I only ask because, this weird little bit of magical realism is the impetus for the entire plot, and it never gets brought up again, and nothing else like it happens for the entire rest of the movie. But whatever, Holly starts recruiting her workmates around the office to be in a group for the competition, and eventually ropes in her boss once she spots him performing karaoke. Even though the performance in question is the aforementioned terrible Burning Love cover, he ends up being treated as the musical veteran and coach for the team. I got the distinct impression from his introductory scene that Holly's boss was also going to be the love interest, and I really, really, really hoped I was wrong, not only because of just how unprofessional and uncomfortable that is, but also because he's got the face and outfit of a villain. I could mute any scene between the 2 of them and easily convince you that he's threatening or extorting her. Unfortunately, I was not wrong. But you see, There's a romantic complication. Boss guy gets a promotion just as soon as he's committed to the Mistle-Tones. Oh no! And for whatever reason, his own boss is like, listen, bro, you've got to be on the plane to South Asia tonight. One would think that what would happen is boss man deliberates, and it looks like he took the job until he swoops in to bolster the group in the competition. What happens instead is way dumber. He takes the job, and the competition just goes on, and snowballs win, who cares? And then only after landing in South Asia is he like, no, I realized I don't care about the job. It's actually you I want, Tia Mowry. And then he comes back for a big sweeping romantic duet to end the movie on. So, like, sure, I guess that was a necessary plot cul-de-sac to have. I sure feel bad for that guy having to pay for 2 plane tickets, though. This whole thing is basically just a fart in the wind. If you're able to get a lot of, like, ironic cringe laughs out of really phoned-in musicals, there might be something there for you, but there's really not a single scene or gag or moment of romance or song that really lands in this movie. It's the kind of thing where you have to question why it was produced beyond just filling up a time slot. It's December 5th, and last night I watched Christmas Wedding Planner. It's the glorious return of Brainpower Studios to this little retrospective, which also means the return of our, miscellaneous black guitar player, who I'm convinced at this point must just be a regular member of the studio staff. There's no way they commission this one guy to pop up in all their movies. That said, compared to the first 2 movies we looked at, this one has some unique, kind of obnoxious stylistic choices. Kelsey, the main character, has a constant inner monologue that's handled really awkwardly. It leads to a lot of characters standing or sitting around quietly while Kelsey does a voiceover that doesn't really accomplish much that dialogue couldn't. Alternatively, we have sequences of her reading out these lengthy texts about what she's thinking to some miscellaneous other party. Even without that, though, this movie has a lot of dead space with pauses between lines of dialogue that feel kinda odd. Scenes also feel like we hold on them for a few too many seconds before a cut. It's like little weird things like that. Then there's the music. This thing is like a Scott Powell show in the way that there's always a backing track in every scene, and the music is always being used to punctuate comedic beats like a constant rim shot. There's constant dead space in this movie, but I don't think there's a second of actual silence. Plot-wise, being set at Christmas is completely incidental to this one, which I think is a first for this video, maybe? Aside from that, this feels like a premise that should actually make for a really fun screwball comedy in more creative hands. Kelsey is her cousin Emily's wedding planner, and she has to team up with a private investigator named Connor when they both suspect that the groom is up to something fishy. So it's one part romantic comedy, one part mystery. That's a fun setup. Unfortunately, none of that potential goes remotely realized. The movie isn't trying to be particularly funny, Kelsey and Connor have no romantic chemistry, and there's no real intrigue to the mystery of what's going on. I will say, though, this movie has an ending that's pretty flippin' bonkers. So early in the movie, Kelsey sees her cousin's groom just sort of coyly talking with the lady at the wedding dress shop, presumably over business, and she immediately assumes that he's cheating. And it goes exactly to the utterly cringeworthy place you think it is. She accuses him basely, gets rightly embarrassed, but then, gasp, shock, and awe. Come the day of the wedding, Connor bursts in to reveal that the fiancé was cheating on Emily, but not with the wedding dress lady, no. With his family's maid. And not just that, he got her pregnant. So Emily's marriage is destroyed, and not even 10 minutes later, while she and Kelsey are commiserating outside the church, Connor comes out and proposes to Kelsey right there on the spot. And then boom, these two people who've known each other for a week just get married that day. Emily is still in her own wedding dress. It's such a bizarre, bat-fracked soap opera ending for this otherwise unremarkable little thing. Oh, and it turns out the mysterious person Kelsey spends the whole movie texting is her dead mom. And I need you to believe me when I said that I called that way in advance. Having 90% of these movies defined by mommy issues just prepares you for certain things. Honestly, it starts to get kind of pathetic and unhealthy though.
Like, the movie does it a few too many times, so it seems like she's literally taking every waking moment that she's alone to converse with a ghost. So yeah, this one is kind of a drag. It's a definite skip. It's December 6th, and yesterday I watched Christmas Survival. This is the first one of these that we had to finish over 2 sittings because we were just so unengaged by the first third or so of it, and I kind of regret committing to it because it never got any less dull. And look, this movie isn't terrible, but like, remember how I talked about A Bad Mom's Christmas, and how I'd have never guessed it was a sequel to anything because it stood on its own so well? Well, this is kind of the opposite of that. As far as I know, this movie isn't connected to any other piece of media, but it plays like I've already had the opportunity to become invested in this family and their drama and their Polish workmen. You could very well retitle this movie Watching an Incredibly Low-Key, Dysfunctional Domestic Christmas. It's a lot of capturing the stress of Christmas preparation and having a bunch of family and guests around. There's domestic drama involving cheating and inheritance and drug use, and almost none of it is actually resolved by the end. When the movie was winding down, it was remarkable how almost plotless it all felt. Like, a lot of family Christmas movies are pretty low on plot, but the hijinks that took place in this one weren't nearly goofy enough for this to be a set-piece-driven ensemble piece like it's billing itself as. Something is always happening, and yet simultaneously it also feels as if nothing happened at all in this movie. It drags big time, but scenes also end extremely abruptly, so it feels like it's moving too fast. Look, I have full faith that this one will appeal to some people. It's kind of cozy and relatable in its own way, but I just don't get a lot out of a movie so straightforwardly portraying a large family Christmas, dwelling a little bit on their assorted baggage, and then sending everyone home without anyone having grown or changed at all. It's slice of life in the most literal way possible, to the point where it's another one that almost doesn't feel like a story. Also, this movie does that thing where you see a character playing what's clearly a modern generation video game, and you just hear contextless, generic 80s style sound effects. That's got nothing to do with anything, I just hate when movies do that. Hi, Hunter. It's December 7th, and last night I watched 48 Christmas Wishes. Dang it, this is another one of those baby movies I wanted to avoid. I'm gonna try and make this one quick. I genuinely feel bad punching down on these things made for preschoolers. That said, this is another one that's fascinatingly, confidently weird. It takes place on, like, an alternate Earth where city names are different. So, Minnedosa instead of Minnesota. And it follows these elves who lose the titular 48 wishes by accidentally burning them in a fire. They get the help of this little human boy to go around town and take stock of what the 48 kids wanted before Christmas Eve night. And, man, the child actors are... well, they're trying. But honestly, what I find most interesting about this movie is how completely incomprehensible the elves' level of knowledge is about pretty much anything. One of the great zingers in this movie includes a Family Guy / Ally McBeal style cutaway gag where the punchline is just that the elves start flossing, like doing the floss dance. Which is odd because not only is that the only gag like that in the movie that's like a weird cutaway gag, but also they can floss, but they don't know what a hug is, but they do know what a handshake is, and they're Christmas elves, but they've never heard of Scrooge, and they don't know that people use stockings for decoration, or that humans have their own Santa suits. Like, they see just a random, like, store-bought Santa suit, and they assume that the kid did something to Santa. And they don't know that passed away is nomenclature for death, even though they seem to have a working knowledge of what death is, and that it exists. So it's just really, really, really strange, like, what level of human understanding or just understanding of the workings of the world that these elves have from scene to scene. In that way, this movie almost feels like it was written by children the same age as the actors. Like, this is what I would expect, like, a first-grade English student to write if you told them to, like, make a succession of jokes about elves not understanding human culture. Jesus, my hands are big. Do my hands look really big to anyone else?
I do like the implications of one scene that because the loss of these 48 wishes represented genuine danger to the power of Christmas to sustain itself on people's belief, it draws attention to how all of these Santa is real movies have to be taking place in a reality where thousands upon millions of children don't have their Christmas wishes unmet every year is just like a matter of course. So thanks for getting me to think about that movie. I don't know, if you've got a kid who's the same age as the characters in the movie, that's the only way I could see this being of any value to you. I told you this was going to be a short one. It's December 8th, and last night I watched Holly's Holiday. I'm legit shocked that this is the first movie in the series with a protagonist who works in marketing. This one follows a woman named Holly who bumps her head, and when she wakes up meets this seemingly perfect man named Bo, who is literally a mannequin from a store window come to life. And honestly, so much of this movie is carried by narrative choices which I'd never have expected given that base premise. This is another actually pretty solid one. We surprisingly don't make a point out of Bo being new to life or whatever. This isn't Life Size, or I guess Life Size 2. I don't know, I haven't actually watched either of the Life Size movies. He has a fully formed life prior to meeting Holly. Other people in the neighborhood know him. He has family. No one else in the story ever realizes that he used to be a mannequin, not even Holly herself. It's less like he's a mannequin magically come to life, and more like bumping her head slipped Holly into a parallel world where he's always existed. The narrative reasons for why that's the case, which I'll get into in a minute, are a little bit iffy, and I get the feeling some people find it difficult to accept, but I just really admire how it impacts the execution and makes for something that's really not what I went into this movie thinking we'd get. He's also kinda scary. Like, he gives me vibes of Homelander from The Boys. Like, he's creepily obsessed with living out a perfect fairy tale romance. He's super controlling and self-centered. He's perfect looking to the point that it's almost uncanny. He's meant to be off-putting, but I swear he looks like CGI in some scenes. It's a unique presentation for this kind of premise, like the complete opposite end of the spectrum from something like Snowglobe. It's rare you see this kind of movie where the girl magically meets a quote-unquote perfect guy, and he's played basically like the antagonist. The relationships that make up the rest of the movie, be they platonic or romantic, are really endearing, and I think that's because the cast are mostly really likable characters. Like, after so many movies where the mains have been these incredibly high-strung, manipulative, or otherwise heavily vice-driven protagonists, Holly is a refreshingly empathetic and reasonable lead. Milo, the actual, human love interest, has some scenes that, I'm not gonna lie, are real petty and iffy, but the movie manages a real feat for a rom-com, which is making me want those two to get together while also being totally satisfied when they don't officially declare themselves boyfriend and girlfriend, or even kiss by the end. I really like Holly's office friends, Dina and Meg. Meg in particular is adorable, and I'm always here for caring, fiercely loyal female friendships in these kind of movies. By the end of this movie, I'm just so endeared to it that I don't even mind that it straight up pulls the most of the movie was a dream cop-out to explain everything. I don't know, on one hand, part of me wanted the movie to try and have an actual explanation for why and how mannequins were coming to life, just to see what they'd come up with, but another part of me really respects that this movie knows that's not where its story is and doesn't prioritize it at all. I'd say of all the movies we've looked at so far, if you're looking for this kind of TV movie Christmas rom-com, this is the one you should actually watch. It's just really cute and sweet and not at all problematic, I don't think. It's December 9th, and last night I watched Girlfriends of Christmas Past. This is another one by the same production company as the last one, Mervista Entertainment. It also has a character named Bo, again. So this girl, Livy, gets dumped by her boyfriend, Anderson, and soon discovers that while they were dating, he was actually cheating on her with two other women, Zoe and Murphy, who he dumped very quickly before her. So it's basically a John Tucker must die situation, and when they see that he's got another new girlfriend, Livy, Zoe, and Murphy dedicate their holiday to embarrassing Anderson and breaking them up. There's a lot of hijinks which are passable enough, but sadly the movie never really justifies these three ladies putting all this nonsense together when They could just go up to the new girl and lay it down. I just keep waiting for the moment where one of them suggests just going up to her and saying, hey, you're dating a total jerkwad, and that just never happens. Like, all of them explicitly need to get this hardcore revenge. Livy completely abandons her job for the sake of this revenge quest. These three sneak into this man's house and spike his eggnog with stuff he's allergic to. They get hired by his company without his knowledge to set up elaborate Home Alone type traps in his house party, which they never end up finding the time to actually rig up, I assume for budget reasons. Like, they go hard. So there's no question to the fact that Livy in particular is completely out of her gourd obsessed with vengeance. But the implications of that don't land quite as well as I think the movie wants them to, for two main reasons. One is that prior to sporadically growing a conscience in the last 10 minutes of the movie, Anderson himself is such a remarkably over-the-top D-bag that I absolutely want the girls to get their revenge on him. Like, everything about him, visually to his performance, is just the most extreme supervillain choices. This movie is built on the premise that all of these confident, well-off, good-looking women are just, like, irresistibly attracted to this man, and I just cannot fathom it. He's the most frat bro-y guy you could imagine, and I do not know what anyone sees in him. The second reason is that Livy's lack of dedication to her job is mainly dramatized through her relationship with her gay assistant, which is not a dynamic I ever come to really care about. The big relationship that does work in the movie is the one between Livy, Zoe, and Murphy. I don't know, something I'm coming to learn about myself over the course of this marathon is that I really like girlfriends in movies. Grown ladies just having camaraderie and being friends, it's just something I find instantly endearing. That said, even that lets me down a little bit because I spent a good chunk of this movie expecting Zoe and Murphy to become, like, actual girlfriends. Their interactions through so much of this movie are so romantically coded, it almost hurts. Like, if one of them was a guy, everyone who watched this movie would be mad that they weren't making out hardcore by the end. One of their last scenes had me on the edge of my seat just waiting for them to get to Smooch Town. I almost threw my remote when it didn't happen. Whatever, my headcanon is that those two started dating off screen. The last movie had a major character who reminded me of Homelander, and this one has a major character who reminds me of Huey Campbell. Like, the love interest in this movie has line deliveries that are so like Jack Quaid's performance in The Boys. It's really, really weird. It's actually not a bad performance here, though. In the big, trite breakup scene, he goes remarkably hard in wringing the drama out of it. I'm not super invested in that romance, though. Like, those two together, they're just fine. Like, the whole movie is just fine. It's a definite step down from the last one in terms of my personal enjoyment, but you could do a heck of a lot worse. That said, in one scene, there's this lady who's holding what's supposed to be two babies, even though it's clearly just two swaddled up pieces of cloth wrapped around nothing with baby noises played over them. I couldn't let this finish without mentioning that. It's December 9th, and last night I watched Godmothered. There's all the trite fish out of water jokes that I've been missing for a couple movies now. I haven't actually been missing them at all, that's a lie. Look, there's some movies that can pull this off really well, but after watching enough of these, I'm starting to get really irritated by this character archetype. Beyond being repetitive, it's also just such a limited space for a lead actor to get to play in. Like, the mistaking Pilates for pirates thing is a funny line, but I'm kind of poisoned on ditzy fish-out-of-water characters. I'm also poisoned on Disney's incredibly surface-level satirizing and criticizing of their own tropes. Like, really deeply sick of it. Like, Disney, you're not allowed to do this anymore. You've been doing it for like a decade and it needs to stop. No more plots or subtext about your old narrative formulas. No more jokes where characters try to sing and another character stops them because they think singing is lame. Just stop it. I mean, granted that this character can't sing well is also just a character trait, but still. The character in question is a fairy godmother named Eleanor, and being a fairy godmother at this point is practically an obsolete profession. But Eleanor is ludicrously dead set on this job, so she decides to find and grant a little girl's wish to prove that the world still needs fairy godmothers. But gasp! Turns out the wish was expired, I guess? And the little girl is now 40-something Isla Fisher as Mackenzie. Eleanor decides to help Mackenzie anyway by setting her up with her true love, and in the process, also helping her with her house and her 2 daughters as a fringe benefit. I feel like the most satisfying and brave way this movie could have ended would be for Eleanor to realize that the world really doesn't need fairy godmothers, but that's okay, and that she really ought to just find something else to do that she's actually suited for, because Isla Fisher was eventually able to find happiness on her own. That would have been my preferred way for this movie to end, but what actually ends up happening is obviously not that, but isn't too bad, I guess. Aside from all the explicit, annoying, look how clever we are by subverting fairy tale formulas framing of it, the way that it's Mackenzie's child and not herself who benefits from the straight-up magical intervention is, that's an interesting idea. Fairy tales are alright so long as you're still young and really need that kind of external confidence booster. And that whole bit at the end, asking different people in the crowd what love means to them, is actually really wholesome and sweet. I don't know, besides all that, this movie just isn't too interesting. I suppose it's marginally better than Noelle as far as straight-to-Disney Plus Christmas movies go. It's just kind of innocent and harmless. This is another one where being set at Christmas doesn't really inform things much, but it's nice to just have that Christmassy mood. Last note, I'm sure June Squibb, who plays the fairy Agnes, I'm sure she's a really sweet old lady in real life, but her narration is unbearably obnoxious. Not only does it feel completely unnecessary, just droning on and on about plot points and character motivations and things that are just conveyed clearly in the scene, but her delivery is also just incredibly grating. It's the first thing you hear in the movie, and it's such a bad step forward. I'm sorry, I felt like I needed to bring that up.
It's December 10th.
Yeah, it's December 10th, and last night I watched The Night Before Christmas. So this is a movie about Christmas getting officially canceled because a mysterious virus broke out in the North Pole. Night Before Christmas predicted coronavirus confirmed. It's also another Christmas movie with a dead parent. I should have started a counter, I swear to God. Somehow, 2/3 of the way through this marathon, probably over that, this is the first and possibly only one of these that's animated, and also probably the only one that's under feature length. This one was another one I've actually seen before. I want to say it aired once or twice on Cartoon Network back in the day, but it wasn't well received, so it never became a regular holiday occurrence or anything. We follow an elf named Elvin, who is pretty much bored with being an elf, so he goes off to start a rap career with a talking dog, his talking dog girlfriend, and an inexplicable talking garden gnome. Yes, I'm serious. The villain, obviously given that setup, is their record producer, whose name is Hang on, I wrote this down. Mephistopheles Beelzebub Casal. And when that virus I mentioned earlier put Santa and the elves out of commission, Elvin and the others decide to help save Christmas, and evil record producer guy and his bratty daughter try to stop them, but they come to learn the meaning of Christmas, etc., etc. And in the end, Elvin gets to be elf in charge, and a superfly, dope, rap superstar. I'm not frontin'. So yay, compromise! This movie is oddly intercut with music videos made up of clips from the movie, but it's not just clips from the movie that have already been played. No, sometimes the clips will be from later in the movie. It's just such a bizarre choice. I assume it was done so the special reaches a certain runtime. This whole thing is full of bizarre choices. For one thing, it operates on goofy Pluto rules, where 2 of our main characters are talking dogs, but also there's regular non-talking dogs. It's a silly, cheesy cartoon with a lot of weird, absurd scenarios and dumb rhymes and puns, and it's really cheaply animated, and it's just incredibly charming. This is another one that you could put on for the toddlers in the room, despite how incredibly dated it is. This movie also has a Santa with beard, but no mustache, which is very, very odd. It's December 11th, and last night I watched the Grinch musical. This is what's bound to be the only stage show in this marathon, and also probably the most I've actively disliked any of these. I can't be sure, maybe I'm wrong, but for the most part, this marathon has been defined by me going into stuff expecting to dislike it, and either really unironically enjoying it, or at least finding some kind of charm to it. Not here. No. No. Nope. Gonna get this out of the way right now. Matthew Morrison as the Grinch was a bad casting choice. Just like Benedict Cumberbatch's take, his voice is really poorly suited for what's supposed to be this surly, grumpy, crotchety character, and it's astonishing how devoid of charisma he is. And like, this version of the story is narrated by Max from the future, which is a choice. Max, who goes from being portrayed by a small Asian child to a white woman to an Asian man to an old white guy, depending on how old he is. And old narrator Max will regularly insert himself into the narrative to interact with himself and other characters. And like, it's weird. Really, everything about Max is weird. Like, the fact that he can talk and be understood by the other characters is such a large deviation for something that ends up impacting the story not at all. Aesthetically, it's not the worst thing ever. I mean, it's bad, but the sets are nice. Like, the Grinch's face is terrible, and the Who's all look either like Ronald McDonald or Princess Carolyn, but I like how they tried to make the sets all stylized like the book. It's surprisingly the most accurate adaptation to the book in the animated short, as far as like the base motivations for the Grinch goes. Like, the Ron Howard and Illumination movies both opted to give him this emotional backstory about how he's got trauma associated with Christmas specifically. It's kind of nice to see an adaptation remember that really he just hates it because everyone is loud and noisy. As expected, though, it shares the problem those movies had, in that this is a children's book you could at most read in 15 or so minutes, and they have to pad it out to ludicrous degrees to get it to something resembling feature length. The best of the songs ever get is approaching passable, and all of them are significantly longer than they need to be. We have at least 2 whole songs, maybe 3, dedicated to the Grinch complaining about Christmas at max before we even hit our first plot point. There's also this shopping mall song that doesn't progress things at all and feels like it goes on for a million years. It's just a really, really bad example of a musical story structure-wise. It also somehow manages what I didn't think was possible, that being that it's a musical based on the Grinch, where the Grinch song is the worst song. How do you do that? It's a pre-made, proven song. It's been made into a rap number not once but twice, and this is still somehow the worst rendition. It's baffling. Really though, the Busta Rhymes Grinch rap is a bop. They also take Where Are You Christmas from the Ron Howard movie and somehow completely miss the point of it. They give it a completely opposite context. It's hilarious. It's not good, guys. How is Jim Carrey still far and away the best Grinch we've gotten in the span of over 50 years? It's December 12th, and last night I watched This Christmas. This is another theatrical release. The first one in, wow, a while. It feels like a Tyler Perry movie, both in the sense that it's about a large black family gathered for a special occasion where they mostly just have familial drama, and that it's got the energy of like a multi-camera sitcom without as many jokes. It's the kind of movie where conflicts are so numerous and broad that it's kind of difficult to compel myself to remember character names or the specifics of relationships or subplots. Kind of like Christmas Survival, this one just washes over me. Like, we've got extramarital affairs, we've got one of the family members being chased by loan sharks, I think, and also one of them spends the movie keeping what I initially assumed was his white girlfriend a secret from the rest of the family, but then it turns out that the girlfriend is actually his wife, and beyond that, she's pregnant. I mean, that actually ends up being a clever twist in the way it recontextualizes a lot of prior scenes. There's a couple of mostly inconsequential kids running around somewhere. There's a lot going on in this movie, okay? Unlike Christmas Survival, this is an ensemble movie that I think kinda suffers from the fact that there's no real protagonist. A movie like this really benefits structurally from having a focus character who you can consider, like the main plot. Not every movie with this setup needs that character, but without it, I find that I get unmoored from the story really easily. I don't know, I just don't think I'm the kind of person who can fully gel with these movies where they're basically whole soap operas but without a central through line. I'm consistently forgetting that whole characters exist when we leave them alone for too long. When I do manage to get fully invested and hooked into a scene, it's almost always on the strength of the performances. One scene in particular has Idris Elba and he just knocks it out of the freaking park. Legit, I almost tear up solely on the strength of his acting. So many names I was kinda shocked to see in this one. David Banner being in this movie threw me off big time. So did Mekhi Phifer and Regina King, but that's mainly just because I just got done rewatching Watchmen and Torchwood Miracle Day. Also, Chris Brown is here, which, whatever. On that note, I guess the music is really nice, probably the best thing about the movie. I don't know, this one isn't really bad in the same way a lot of these are, so much as it is just not my speed. If it sounds like the kind of thing you'd be into, you'll probably like it a lot, but for me, it's just kinda unfocused. Mostly fine, though. The highlight of the whole movie is probably the very ending before the credits, where it's just a 5-minute long, unbroken take of the cast dancing out of character. Apropos of nothing, this movie has some really, really bad fake rain. I thought that was worth noting. It's December 13th, and last night I watched the Christmas calendar. Okay, technically it's December 14th. I'm recording this at the same time as I record the next one on the list because somehow I accidentally deleted the original video file for this part, so, Also, I should have probably been wearing the Santa hat the whole time. Now I just feel stupid. Let's pretend I was wearing it for the past 20 days. I'm holding off talking about the movie because I legit fell asleep watching this one. It's that astonishingly unengaging. I don't know if you picked up on this already, but you can tell how invested I am in any of these movies that I talk about by how much effort I put into bothering to remember character names and factoring them into the script for the review. And it's honestly a struggle for me to do that here, even with a whole scene around the middle of the movie that's almost solely dedicated to reminding you of the names of every major character. This is the third Mervista Productions film on the list, and it's remarkable how much of a step down this feels compared to the other two, in pretty much every way. If Holly's Holiday is here, and Girlfriends of Christmas Past is here, then this movie is probably around here. This is only going to mean anything if you've tracked which studios have made which movies like I've been doing this month, but in directing, writing, acting, and even music, this feels like it could have been a Brainpower Studios product. Remember when I was talking about Holly's Holiday and how much I enjoyed the title character being just a normal, down-to-earth, sweet lady instead of a high-strung weirdo like so many of the protagonists in these movies have been? Then lo and behold, Emily, the protagonist of this movie, is a massively high-strung weirdo. To the point that I get major Leslie Knope vibes from her, but she's not fun like Leslie Knope. She's not even the inexplicably odd that eventually becomes kind of fun, like Kate from 12 Dates of Christmas. She just makes me roll my eyes. The premise here is that she's obsessed with escalating this petty rivalry with the new bakery across the street from her, and simultaneously reading through the fortunes contained in this mysterious house-shaped advent calendar from a secret admirer. And I guess this is a town where literally nothing happens, because the whole town pretty much gathers at her bakery daily to see her read out these fortunes, and the local newspaper makes a big event out of counting down the days till her secret admirer reveals themselves. It's ludicrous. I'm shocked the characters in this movie don't fall asleep with how uninteresting their lives must be. Why does anyone care so much about this dang calendar? Why does the movie dedicate its time to that, when whole major plot points don't even get depicted on screen? The characters occasionally mention a Christmas fair that they both want to bake in, and it's an extension of their competition, and I guess I blinked and missed it, because we're just told Emily won without ever seeing the fair take place. Unless we did, I don't know, it was so hard to pay attention to this movie, I kind of don't trust myself to synopsize it fully. What I can say is that there's multiple male characters, 4 of them, who are considered candidates for who the secret admirer could be, and I don't know who could care, because they all look like the same man. They're all just skinny, pasty guys with short hair and stubble.
It's like this movie was a convention for the most generic-looking guys you could cast as the lead in a rom-com. Having two old spinster characters whose sole purpose in the movie is just to speculate about which guy might be into our lead is not going to make me bother to distinguish between them. And oh god, the terrible, terrible French accent on the actual male lead. It was so trash that I was convinced it had to be an act in-universe. And that's really all I have to say about him. Watch it turn out that was that actor's actual accent and now I just look like a complete jerk. The whole movie is a real nothing burger. No one stands out, the plot has nothing even resembling stakes, getting through it was really just kind of a chore. I feel betrayed. I believed in Humor Vista Studios. It's December 14th and last night I watched Elf Pets, an Arctic Fox tradition. So, I guess I was wrong about Night Before Christmas being the only animated one on this list. My B. I should probably have a take about Elf on the Shelf being a tool of the surveillance state or whatever, and yeah, it's weird and creepy how the defining gimmick of this product is that these are elves who are just watching everything at all times 24/7, and children are meant to sanction and encourage that. But is this particular animated short for tiny children worth dwelling on that any longer? No, probably not. God, I promised I wouldn't do any more baby movies. Look, I got nothing against baby movies. I just kind of think of them the same way I think of baby food. It's usually bound to be flavorless mush that goes down smooth and exits without a trace just as quickly, and by design it's meant to be kind of unpleasant and useless to anyone who's developed a palate. I don't know how I'm supposed to fill up time talking about stuff like that. I could mention how this is another kind of interesting example of Santa lore with some kind of arbitrary, weird-feeling choices. I could talk about how I've always hated the design of the elf on a shelf, and how off-putting I find the Smurf-like sameness of all of them. Or how, once again, I'm absolutely certain that this is part of a larger franchise of shorts, and how disorienting it is that this one assumes I already have a stake in all this. But, this is a 25-minute little thing, and you know what? I'm not even gonna bother. I'm done apologizing for these things. You've seen the runtime of this video. I'm frankly not convinced that this will ever get enough views to be worth the undertaking, so having a couple of these spread out that I can cop out on and bang out in less than 3 minutes is my Christmas gift to myself. It's December 15th, and last night I watched A California Christmas. It's not often you see a rom-com starring an actual couple who are straight up married in real life, let alone one where one of them wrote the dang thing. Though it makes sense, that being the case, that this is the only one of these so far with the closest to what I'd call a straight-up sex scene, It's also not all the time that a Christmas rom-com starts out with a cow giving birth, so that's neat. At the time of this recording, this movie dropped on Netflix yesterday, which makes this now the most recent movie on this list, and I think it's kinda the apotheosis of the Christmas rom-com side of this retrospective, specifically in that it's something with clear and obvious flaws, and it's just a little schlocky, but I also can't help but find it surprisingly emotionally fulfilling. Josh Schwickard, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is the male lead, Joseph, and he looks kind of like a mix of Zac Efron and Brenton Thwaites. There's also a scene in this movie where he looks exactly like Tom Welling in Crisis on Infinite Earths. It's weird. Anyway, he ends up helping give the aforementioned calf birth, and in the chaos of that he gets mistaken by this farm owner who's the female lead, played by Lauren Swickard. He gets mistaken for the new ranch hand, and he just kinda goes along with it so he can endear himself to them and get them to sell their land. And you can see exactly where this is going from 5 billion miles away. So that this is engaging at all really is down to the execution. The female lead, Callie, is needlessly, ludicrously confrontational to start with. I get it, her mom has cancer, and she's grieving over her dad and fiancé being dead, and she has a heavy emotional stake in keeping the land, but her plan A for dealing with someone coming over and negotiating for the land is to threaten them with a shotgun. Tell me I'm not alone in thinking that's, excessive. She's a perfectly amicable character otherwise. The two of them and her sister and her mom actually have a real endearing chemistry, and it's just like, dang, laying it on a bit thick with the worst foot forward. The chemistry doesn't just apply to them either. Joseph's scenes with his assistant and the actual ranch hand whose identity he's adopting, all that stuff is super cute. And when all the really dramatic stuff starts happening, the performances all around I find really engaging. This is one I'd say is really carried by the actors. Something noteworthy about this one is that until the second half, when all of that dramatic stuff starts happening right on top of each other, there's like no background score for the first half of this thing. It's frankly a little jarring when it starts popping up consistently with just how absent it is prior to that. Granted, it's also a nice change of pace to so many of these Christmas rom-coms that have backing tracks that just will not shut up. Like, God, how many movies have I been through on this marathon that I haven't even mentioned the inability to have even a moment of silence? This movie is insanely, ludicrously trite, plot-wise, but it's also just really, really sweet, and it's impossible for me not to get invested in. I do have to dock it points, because of all the movies on this list, it's far and away the one where Christmas is the least relevant. Like, there's literally no conceivable reason other than, I assume, the release date that this had to be a Christmas thing. Genuinely no reason at all. Eden and I consistently got a laugh from each other just by reminding ourselves that, oh yeah, this is a Christmas movie. There's almost no Christmas imagery at all until the last 3 minutes. It's hilarious. But seriously, I think you'll like this one if incredibly cliche romantic drama is something you don't mind. It's December 16th, and last night I watched The Spirit of Christmas. It's the 4th go-around for Mervista Productions. It's your chance at redemption, you guys. This is also the first one of the 4 I've looked at from this studio that's straight-up magical realism. Just like A California Christmas, this one involves trying to lease property. This one, however, also involves a ghost. And man, this ghost is a real douche. And that's true of him in life, too. Like, I may have to look back and double check, but I'm pretty sure this is the least I've liked a male lead in one of these for a while. Like, I get it, he's from a century ago, and he just wants to be left alone, but he's such a boorish, standoffish, controlling, chauvinistic prick. I don't know, is some of this on the actor? Like, I don't want to be mean to that guy, but he's like a charisma black hole. I honestly can't tell if any of this dialogue or characterization could have been salvaged by a better performance, but all around, it's one of the weaker performances in this marathon off the top of my head. His line reads are just really, really, really bad. Also, his hair is stupid. He looks like one of the Proud Boys. And it's a shame, because I like the female lead well enough. She's cute, and she has a good head on her shoulders, and I just spend the whole movie thinking, sweetie, you are far too good for him. You're too good looking for him. You're too fun for him. Just forget all about him. Go ahead and appraise the property, and go get your promotion, Kate. Like, let this guy stew in his misery for the rest of his afterlife. Like, really, I think these two might get an award for the couple I've least wanted to see get together in one of these. It's not helped by this being the absolute quickest turnover any of these couples have, going from at odds to flirting all sweetly. Even in some of the worst of these, the couples have had chemistry. Here I'm just tempted to end the movie early, so I can pretend this lady got away from this complete jackass, and I wouldn't have to sit through the movie trying to tug at my feels with them being all cute. A lot of time spent trying to work out what exactly killed Ghost Dude. What's his name? Daniel? Dennis? Darnell? Whatever. Finding out who killed him and why is the central narrative thrust of the movie, and when we finally find out, it's uncovered and resolved so quickly. Like, dang, just toss aside the resolution of your whole plot, guys. Once again, not helped by the fact that the line reads are beyond wooden. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for harping on this. I'm being kind of mean, but I just do not like this movie. There's nothing in this one for me. Like, I don't know, excluding the Mistle-Tones and, like, the baby movies, this is the one I most emphatically recommend that you skip. Way to blow it, Mervista. You're 2 for 4. And, like, listen, I know there's contention about what accents and dialects you might have heard in certain parts of America a century ago and beyond, but Hearing what I assume are these actors' standard Midwestern American accents in this upper class period setting is kinda jarring.
It's December 17th, and last night I watched Four Christmases. You like the little makeshift star above the head? Yeah, it's totally intentional. It's day 25, finally. And, yeah, I think I'm good after this, you guys. Not like this movie is anything especially bad. I fought with myself for a little while over whether I should end this out with a movie that's either standout bad or standout surprisingly good. And I just don't think ending this marathon on a quote unquote meaningful, impactful movie is something I can force. This is a finish, not a finale. And after 25 of these, this is the first one we watched on cable. This far in, and we're still doing firsts. We didn't even watch the Grinch musical on cable. Jeez. This one has Vince Vaughn as Brad and Reese Witherspoon as Kate. This couple who are honestly couple goals for the first few minutes of the movie. They're just two people who really love each other and don't care an ounce for conventions. Things get real tense, though, when their plan to spend Christmas in Fiji is ruined, and they have to spend the holiday commuting to each of their divorced parents' homes. There's Brad's father's side of the family, who are all vicious psychopaths. Like, they should all be in jail. It frankly takes them way too long to bail out of that one. There's Brad's mom, who's all hippy-dippy and is dating her son's friend from grade school. There's Kate's mom, who's a controlling Jesus freak, but also super horny. Like, it's that kind of frat bro-y comedy. Like the kind where, once again, everyone is this ridiculous, unbelievable cartoon caricature of a human being. This one is a weird one because it's a romantic comedy where the emphasis is on the comedy, and I'm not really here for it. Like, it's one of these worlds where it's clearly an incredibly heightened reality where everyone is just kind of a cartoonish weirdo, but even accepting that and buying into that as the reality of this movie, I find it incredibly, like, jarring, and it really takes me out of the story just how unreasonably cartoonish everyone is. Like, A Bad Mom's Christmas was another sort of immature adult comedy with a lot of heightened reality and big, broad arch characters. But this movie doesn't really have anything that I can ground my emotional stakes in, like that movie did. Like, Vince Vaughn and Reese Witherspoon have a surprising amount of chemistry, and there is the occasional token moment where those two characters are talking to each other like human beings. But once the premise is set up and it's time for that chemistry to get smothered in the over-the-top goofy shenanigans, I just don't think too many of the jokes land, and too much of their stuff is sniping and talking over each other, and it's a lot of Vince Vaughn ad-libbing, and it never really congeals into something that feels like a thing I can actually care about, you know? The movie is about these characters having to survive their estranged, bizarro families, and with something like that premise, especially in a Christmas movie, you'd expect that most of the family stuff gets a resolution. And it kinda does, but also not really. It just kinda never really happens. Like, there's a scene between Vince Vaughn and his dad that I suppose is meant to be a reconciliation of sorts, but it honestly reads as incredibly cynical and sinister. The movie does more to resolve the relationship between the mains, and I will say that I really appreciate that this is ultimately a movie about the importance of communication. I don't know, I guess it's just good to have a rom-com whose explicitly stated lesson is be open to having conversations with your partner about what it is you both want out of life, because if you can't comfortably do that, you're probably with the wrong person. But I don't know, this story doesn't feel quite complete. I'd say find a trailer for this movie or something to get a vibe of the brand of comedy, and if that's your thing, then watch it, because the gags are really, I think, all that there is to see this movie for. But it's not my thing, and if what I've described to you as like the brand of humor doesn't strike you as something you dig, then skip it. And we're back. We're back here. So, having gone through all of these various Christmas thingies, what would I consider the highlights and the lowlights, I guess you could call them? This almost seems a little bit unfair, but I feel like for the most part, the easy highlights did in fact end up being the stuff that was theatrical releases. Now that's not true uniformly, but the stuff with the higher budgets and the sort of higher expectations and the bigger name, more experienced cast members generally, I think, had a bit of an edge over the stuff that's just Joe Schmo writing and starring in whatever random Christmas work by commission, basically. So I'm thinking like I'll Be Home for Christmas and A Bad Mom's Christmas were a pair of movies that I really enjoyed. A Bad Mom's Christmas you can probably tell because that became kind of a constant point of comparison for other movies, and I didn't mean for that to happen, but that's just a movie that I feel got a lot of things right that other movies in this marathon kind of attempted to and couldn't quite capture. That said, there were a couple of direct-to-TV ones that I did enjoy a lot. Holly's Holiday, I like to think I conveyed about how much I enjoyed that. That and the other one, The Girlfriends of Christmas Past, they're not like anything great or anything, but they were really surprisingly good times. 12 Dates of Christmas is one that I look back more fondly on the more distance I get from it. Where that one I find kind of endearing just for how utterly bizarre it is by virtue of its main character. So those are generally the ones that immediately come to mind as the batch of movies that I really feel like were solid movies. And for I'll Be Home for Christmas and A Bad Mom's Christmas in particular, I can see myself revisiting those yearly just because I think they're decent Christmas movies. Lowlights, unsurprisingly, considering the title of the video, the lowlights were a lot more common. Obviously, there was all the baby movies, which, I mean, those movies were not designed to engage a person like me, so obviously they don't engage me. But there's also the stuff like the Brain Power Studios movies, which are just, like, they've clearly got the lowest budgets. They've got what seemed, to me at least, to be the least experienced and the least sort of effective actors. They've got the blandest, most TV direction, even compared to the other TV movies. But aside from those, there's stuff like the Grinch musical and Christmas Wedding Planner or the Mistle-Tones. Mistle-Tones was probably the hardest one for me to sit through. Like, a couple of these were honestly real chores. Like I mentioned, I slept through the Christmas Calendar. Weirdly enough, I honestly think, and this isn't like uniform across all of these movies obviously, but I think a lot of my highlights happened to be the ones where it being Christmas was actually involved with the plot. Again, this is excluding the baby movies because it being Christmas is kind of weirdly imperative to the plots of all the baby movies. But thinking about the stuff outside of that, I find it interesting that a lot of the Mervista Productions and Brainpower Studios, those kind of movies that I didn't care as much for, also happen to be the ones where it being Christmas was just so arbitrary. Like, quite a lot of these movies that I didn't care for as much were the ones where it could honestly be set any time, and Christmas is really just more of a backdrop. I don't know, like I said, that's not really consistent enough to be an actual pattern, but I thought that was interesting. Just how much I consciously didn't care for it when these movies were so, like, not actually having anything to do with Christmas or the holiday. I feel like if there's any kind of, like, emotional through line to this video, or any sort of tangible takeaway that I have and that I'd want anyone who watched this all the way through to have, it would be that I think that a lot of these movies that are, reasonably called bad. I just think there's a real heart to these movies that are set around and released around Christmas that a lot of other movies don't necessarily have. I started with this feeling of like, gosh, is this going to be a chore? Am I going to basically just be having a really bad time, a really bad viewing experience, and regaling you with nonstop complaints? But I feel like I've had a surprisingly but I feel like I've had a surprisingly decent time just basking in the Christmassiness of all these movies, even the ones I might like less. And I don't know, this whole experiment has just been really fun, and it's made me feel good for the most part. And hey, if you made it all the way here to the end, then congratulations, I'm proud of you. I appreciate the watch minutes. But yeah, if you've seen any of the movies that I've talked about, any of the 25 movies that this video is about, and you have your own thoughts, then please let me know in the comments. How do you feel about this really experimental format of like a really lengthy video recorded over a long time about lots of different pieces of media? Because, like, if you guys are down for that, I could do this again with something else. It doesn't even have to be a holiday type thing. But yeah, have a happy holiday and stay safe. And here's to 2021. Bye-bye.